So I'm just going to get started now. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you for joining RiskPal's session about improving working practices in television. We are hosting this event because we are a safety risk assessment platform, and we work predominantly in television with TV production houses and podcasters and news production every day, and we have people risking their lives in high-risk war zones. But also doing investigations on the domestic front and basically just making TV that you watch every day. And we focus really on risk assessment and on the health and safety and security side of things. But in the last year, we have seen a dramatic increase in the number of our clients and people that we speak to talking about how bad television is. I mean, this comes against the backdrop of numerous reports talking about bad working practices in television and how things are really deteriorating for people. And obviously, we're coming off the back of a slump in ad revenue, which doesn't help things at all. And a large portion of workers are out of work, quite frankly, at this point in time. So we wanted to host this event just to not just focus on what's wrong with the industry, but to focus on what we can do moving forward, which is, I'm sure, what they say on every panel. But we think there's a really good opportunity here because when TV gets back to some sort of normality, we hope, there's an opportunity for the workforces across the world to say, look, we're a bit fed up of how things have been going, and we want things to change. So we put together this great panel of thought leaders in the industry who have been focusing on the issues of how to improve working practices. And so I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves, and then we'll take on. So I don't know how everyone presents in their different on their screens, but I'm going to start with Rowan. You can just introduce yourself.
Hi there. Thanks so much for inviting me today and that very kind introduction. So my name's Rowan Ost. I am an academic and consultant with Real Time Media, which I run with Michelle Reynolds. We are ex-Share My Telejob co-directors. I was originally a television producer, and then I left TV to do a PhD about 10 years ago. So our work really focuses on flexible working, particularly job sharing, as a way of improving working conditions. And my research is around ethics of care, particularly around marginalized groups and underrepresented groups in film and TV.
Great. Catherine, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Captain Lewis Davis. I'm a freelance TV and film producer specializing in drama. I started in the theatre many years ago, and then have worked my way up from being a runner to a third, to a second, to a first, and then went into line producing and producing. As I say, I'm freelance, so I work for whoever will have me. So that's my background, really. I'm also a trustee of the Mark Milson Foundation. And for those of you who don't know about Mark Milson, he was a camera operator who was tragically killed while filming a car stunt while shooting in Ghana in 2017. And from there, we started a foundation, which by now we produced a health and safety course that I'm sure we'll talk about later in the session. But it's to raise awareness, really, for everybody of what they should be aware of as far as health and safety is concerned in their workplace on a TV or film set.
Thanks, Catherine. And RiskPal, we work closely with the Mark Milson Foundation. We're a big fan of their work. And lastly, but not least, Dr. Krista Van Ralt. Krista, can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you've been doing recently?
Yeah, my name's Krista Van Ralt. I'm an academic at Bournemouth University, where I'm an associate professor in film and television, and I'm sort of interested in working conditions and management practices in British television, and that sort of partly sort of, if you like, physical health and safety is part of that, but mental health and care are sort of a bigger part of it. And most recently, I've been working on a project looking at production management. Started before the current slump, when production managers were very thin on the ground, people couldn't get them, and we were looking at what was going on there and the sort of brain drain, if you like, of people leaving production management. Yeah, we've just recently published a report which sort of really takes apart what the issues are for production managers, the sort of issues of overloading and undervaluing of their work in particular, and some of the sort of recent developments, if you like, that have increased the workload of production managers for all sorts of reasons. And we are working at the moment on a couple of academic papers as well, looking at some specific issues, partly about the feminization of the role and the impact that has, and one looking at the sort of production editorial split that goes on in program making. I should say that Rowan's involved in that project as well, and is a co-writer on all of those outputs.
Great, thanks, Krista. So just a bit of housekeeping. Obviously, we've got Q&A. I can see already a question has been popped in there. So please feel free to put questions in there, and I'll address them to the panel as and when we can. This session is being recorded. We will be in contact with you after the event to share the recording. And for anyone who couldn't attend, we'll also be posting it on social media. But I want to start with some really tragic news. Before the session began, I actually was on LinkedIn, scrolling, so to speak, and a story popped up on my LinkedIn feed about a producer. So it's a story from Deadline, which broke this morning, about a young producer called John Balsam, who tragically committed suicide in May. He basically has been working on a true crime series, was working on a true crime series, and he received death threats while he was working on that series. He suffered exhaustion. This is all according to the article, and he suffered a mental health crisis, and he took his own life in May, sadly. He leaves behind a young wife who's pregnant and a daughter. And after this event, when we share the email with the link to the video, we will share a GoFundMe page for him as well. Panel 4 is investigating this case according to the Deadline article, and they're looking into the issues of overwork and exhaustion and what led up to his death. It's a really tragic case. It's quite, sadly, really what we're talking about in this session, and I'm sure we'll get deeper into it, but I don't know if the panel have any sort of comments or headline thoughts about it. I know it's just broken for you as well. So I don't know if anyone wants to say anything. Okay. Well, look, let's get started. And let's talk about what is actually happening in television right now in terms of working practices. And I'm going to start with Rowan again. Rowan, I mean, you were brought in by businesses to fix bad working practices, right? I'm summarizing what you do, but tell me why you're brought in and what you're brought in to fix.
Well, I wouldn't say that we have a solution for all poor working practices at all. I think that would be rather overemphasizing what we can do. But what we try and impress upon employers is that they need to take responsibility for working practices. We have an intensely freelance industry, which generates a level of individuated responsibility where every single person is told that they have to take responsibility for their own work lives. We try and flip that into employers. So whether or not it's managers directly on the ground, whether it's production companies, whether it's broadcasters, whether it's industry bodies like PACT, who set the tone for a lot of this work, we try and work towards their understanding that they need to take responsibility for their workforce. There are a number of disconnects that operate in television and also in film. And, you know, this is thrown into sort of horrible focus with the really tragic news about John Bolton this morning and the reports about it, where you have different institutions saying they're going to investigate in different ways. But there's no discourse that directs an understanding towards what's the kind of web of conditions that generated this man's you know, towards taking his own life. So really that's what we try and get at. And yeah, so that's what we go. And when we do that quite literally by through focusing on job sharing and flexible working, because that draws attentiveness towards work and how you really start to think about your own work, because we're not necessarily asked in TV to think about our work and to think about the impact of how we operate on other people. So while we ask managers to do that, obviously, and institutions to do that, it has to be something that is engendered so that everyone is able to do that, to understand their own work in relation to other people.
Okay, thanks. And obviously you worked on this report with Krista. Krista, the report's titled "Where Have All the Production Managers Gone?" I know it was written a bit after the pandemic, and you know, there was a dearth of production managers. But production managers, production coordinators, they're really the backbone of TV production. What made you look at this? And tell us a bit about the report. Tell us what you found out. Why are production managers leaving the industry?
I mean, why we looked at it actually is quite interesting. We did a report called State of Play during COVID, which looked at working conditions and management practices across unscripted television, right across all roles. And it was very, we got responses from people in sorts of areas, but it was very clear that what was coming through from people in production in particular was quite concerning. And that was kind of, if you like, what sort of got us interested in that particular aspect of work. I think a few things what came through, a few things came through. And obviously some of the issues that production managers have are the same as other people have. You know, I mean, it's very clear that productions, for example, are commissioned on budgets that are too small, and everyone knows they're too small. Schedules that are too tight, and everyone knows they're too tight. You know, so there is, as several of our respondents have sort of talked about, the impossible goal. You know, you set yourselves up to do something that can't really be done unless everybody works, you know, 20 hours a day and so forth. And some of those things are the same for everyone. I think where production managers sort of stand out is a few things, one of which is the number of additional jobs that have loaded onto them over recent years. So and it's in the nature of the work that what production managers actually do is just everything else that anybody else doesn't do, which means every time something new comes along, like, oh, we've now got COVID regulations, oh, we've left the EU, so we've got more complicated travel arrangements and visas and God knows what, oh, we've got GDPR, oh, we've got a great new scheme to help with mental health in the industry, ironically. You know, whatever it might be that comes along, suddenly that's another job. Sustainability, intimacy, you know, it's another job. For production managers, it's always another job. If you're sort of looking at really sort of high-end drama, maybe it's another person, but a lot of the time in lower budget stuff, it isn't another person, it's just an extra job for this person whose job nobody understands in the first place. So that they basically get very, very overloaded to the point that, you know, they haven't even got time to do their central job. So that's one of the big things, this sort of constant overloading, which is partly a result. And I mean, it is extraordinary, the number of production managers who will say, members of the editorial team will say to them, I don't really know what it is you do. And these are people who've worked in telly for 10 years, you know, oh, I don't really know what production managers do. Because people don't know what they do, they don't understand that they can't do an infinite amount of work. So it becomes quite problematic, I think, this overloading. And another thing which came through as a big problem was the sort of always on expectation. You know, the idea that the production manager is available on some kind of, you know, fourth emergency service at all times, day and night. And that turns into an expectation, not just for crises, but for really quite trivial stuff. People getting calls at 3 o'clock in the morning for stuff that really grown-ups should be able to do for themselves, you know, this sort of thing. So that comes through very strongly. And the other thing, and the paper Rowan and I have just been working on, looks at the sort of attitudes, I suppose, in terms of how editorial and production can work together. When they work together well, it's brilliant, you know, mutual respect, really good partnership, everyone communicates, it ticks over, that's great. But there are too many instances of people in editorial treating, I guess, everyone in production management like skivvies, basically. And this sense of mopping up after everybody and not being given any credit and not having their work valued. And that's actually a really strong, it's one of the strongest things that came through our survey, as well as that production is broken one that was a year or so ago. Similar thing, one of the strongest things that came through was a sense of not being respected, not being valued. And it seemed to matter to people even more than not being paid on anything resembling parity with people of similar responsibilities. Basically what it adds up to, a lot of it adds up to, is people leaving or people going to do something else. You know, actually going, you know what, I could go and be a COVID coordinator or for a while, or sustainability or an intimacy coordinator, just do one thing instead of 100 things and get the same money. So there's a real issue. One of the problems for the industry, I would suggest, is that production managers have really good transferable skills. So if they want to go and work somewhere that doesn't involve 18-hour days and, you know, unpredictable childcare arrangements for better money, they can. So yes, what happens is that whenever production gets busy, top of the list, always, all those screen skills surveys, always put production managers, line producers, production coordinators at the top of the list of the roles they can't fill.
Right. And obviously there's a slump right now in TV production. So it's a bit ironic that we're talking about a sort of dearth of production managers, because I think Bectu has said 68% of or they did a survey at the beginning of the year, and 68% of respondents from the TV industry were out of work. So, I mean, what does this mean when, I mean, assuming that we will get back to some semblance of normality in production, what does this actually mean in terms of, will those people be there, or will they have just flown the coop?
Well, that is the issue, isn't it? I mean, I think what we learned from COVID, obviously there were a lot of people not working. Some people sort of toughed it out. Some people didn't. They went, right, you know, enough is enough. And it becomes the last straw. And there's definitely a lot of chatter about that happening now. You know, people are saying it's worse than COVID. And some people will say, you know, it's not worth it. So production picks up again and suddenly there's no one there, which certainly happened after COVID, or there's no one there. There are people who are much more junior, everybody has to get bumped up, then everybody complains that people have been over promoted. You know, the same issue, that people leave and they take their skills with them. Yeah,
and I mean, just to put this in perspective, I was going through the prism by which I view all the world at the moment, which is LinkedIn, and I saw a post by a production manager, and it read, I am leaving the TV film industry. I've given my life to the entertainment moguls. What have they given back? Mental breakdowns, a doomed social life, and the biggest industry shut down in 60 years. So this is a real problem that's happening right now. Katrin, you're working in production. You're on a production. Tell us briefly about what you're working on, and are you seeing this slow down? How do you feel about this?
Well, I feel quite depressed having listened to all that. I work in scripted television, so I think I probably have bigger teams, and so those teams are therefore more supported. I do understand how people are always on, in that I was a line producer for many years, and that was how, whether it be right or wrong, that was how I approached my job. It isn't right, and it shouldn't be the case, which is why a lot of what we've done with the Mark Milson Foundation course is to make people aware of what is an acceptable working scenario and what isn't an acceptable working scenario, because I think traditionally we've created this situation for ourselves because nobody's actually told us what isn't acceptable, and now more people are demanding a work-life balance, whereas possibly we hadn't had one traditionally. And so with the course, what I did on my last production was I made everybody who was attached to the production, from the director and the DOP to the chefs and catering, to the drivers, to security, to everybody, they all had to do this course, so that we all started at the beginning with a basic awareness of what was acceptable. And actually the production was great because of that, because we knew that we were all coming from the same place. And I think that this is really important, in that you say production managers are always supposed to be available, and it can be, oh, production will do that, and that's not right, because production are a department in their own right, as are any other department, and so yeah, we do need to change a culture, I think, but I think it might have been a culture that we've actually created for ourselves.
Great, and let's just, well, not great. I mean, none of this is great,
Not
sadly.
great.
But I mean, let's just talk a bit about Mark Milson and what happened there, because you know, I started this off talking about a man who's committed suicide in the last month or so. Mark Milson did not commit suicide. He died in a tragic incident. He was a friend of yours. Just tell us what happened.
Yeah, so Mark was a prolific camera operator, and he had gone out to shoot a car stunt. Well, he was in Ghana shooting a drama, and he on this particular day they were shooting a car stunt where the car went in the direction that it wasn't supposed to, and it hit Mark's camera, and he was killed instantly. There have been various inquiries, and it should obviously never have happened. But there were also situations where people should have said something, but individuals aren't used to saying something. They assume. I found this something in there are more, especially in scripted drama, there are more and more departments, as you said, COVID, sustainability, but there's also this health and safety department. So there's somebody else dealing with that. And I think we have all stopped thinking for ourselves to understand that we are responsible for ourselves and for everybody else around us. And that isn't just something within the TV and film industry, that's something as part of society. And so I think that whether it be because you're too scared to speak up, or whether it be because you don't feel it's your place, or whatever it is, we need to make sure that people know that if there are things that they're not happy about, they should speak up. But this is something we should do in our everyday lives anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, the Mark Milson Foundation, when I say you, it's come out with some really startling statistics. I think 75% of people feel that their safety or that of a colleague has been directly compromised. They've talked about a concealment under a web of non-disclosure agreements when an incident happens. Rowan, I know you're really passionate about this. Do you want to give us your thoughts about what happens after an incident, what we can do better?
I think it's more about why people are reticent in speaking up. I was thinking just now about the mechanisms that are in place to help people speak up. So, we always advocate for people to be BEC2 members. CISA is a fantastic initiative that I hope everyone supports. We have the Call It app for day to day, but it's and that should be employed on every single production by every production company, by every broadcaster. The mechanisms by which people are told they can speak up aren't trusted. That's the problem. So you ring these lines and you often have to record a message. You don't know who's going to hear them, if you ring these broadcaster lines. And I'm not singling out any one broadcaster for responsibility, but they're not fit for purpose as they are because people don't trust them. And if people don't trust, then they're not going to speak up. And at the other end of things, there is the excessive use of NDAs. Channel 4 have been exposed for doing this in their working at ITN, but they're not the only one. So there has to be more adequate broadcaster and production company responsibility for addressing the dangers that people are in. And they're not just extreme dangers when people tragically lose their lives. They are the everyday dangers of overwork. We know how damaging overwork is. It's the strain to people's mental health of never seeing their family. It's the worry in a freelance capacity of not having enough money, of not knowing where your next job is going to come from, because commissioning don't have an adequate schedule. They don't, there could be a commissioning schedule laid down by the broadcasters, which would allow people to plan their lives. It's worry about childcare. It's all of these things. It's like I say, there's a web of worry that really, really grinds people down. And that has to be considered with, alongside the kind of extreme end of things when people do lose their lives, is my answer. So yes, but I suppose I do feel passionate.
When you talk about pay, I mean, we as a small business, we feel this all the time. We work with big broadcasters. Sorry, Rowan's got to go off and sort something in her garden very quickly. She'll be back in a second. But I mean, we work with big broadcasters all the time at RiskPal. They often don't pay us for months at a time. And it's really hard. I mean, Catherine, how do you feel about this? Is this something that you as a line producer can resolve? Who do you look to fix this? Because we end up speaking to the finance department and we just get pushed off all the time. And how do small freelancers deal with this issue?
Yeah, that's a scenario that can happen in any field, isn't it? If that's how the organization works, and they don't pay for however long, that happens. I mean, freelancers as crew members, you would hope that they were paid at the end of the week as they're supposed to be. It's an interesting scenario. I was talking to a colleague earlier, and he is a line producer, and he at the minute is having an issue with a crew wanting to work after overtime after a 6-day week because they're passionate about the project that they're working on. And this is also something that happens. We are working in a creative industry, and so we're creative people, and we are passionate about what we're doing. And so there's a scenario, not just that it can work on both sides, and so there has to be somebody somewhere saying stop, and when we have to take control of the passion, then, if you know what I mean, because it can be also that crew members want to continue working. Sorry, I digress because about the money, but I would expect that the production is in control of the way they pay people. That should happen at the end of a working week, or it does on productions that I've worked on.
What if it doesn't happen? What should people do? Because this is a refrain that we hear all the time from people in TV production. We're not paid on time. We're waiting to be paid. What recourses have they got?
Well, you've got to go to your line producer and your accounts department.
Okay, great. I'll bear that in mind when my finance people are complaining to me. Okay, but
I'd also recommend joining Back2. You know,
joining back to
if you're a director, be a member of Directors UK. You know, there are mechanisms by which you can make note of the fact that you should be paid on time. It is not unreasonable to be paid on time. And I think there's still tremendous fear of reputational damage if you're seen as the one who is complaining. But really, it's not a complaint to say, oh, you know, actually, I need to pay my mortgage, or actually, I'd really like to be able to pay for my child's birthday party, you know, stuff like that. All of the life stuff that people should be allowed to attend to. But the worry about being seen as that complainer, I think, is really debilitating to people, especially at a time when there is a relative dearth of work. And I noticed a question as I had a quick look about you know, is this the right time to be complaining about working conditions? You know, as individuals, you shouldn't have to complain. This is why Back2 is here. This is why industry bodies are there to represent you. You shouldn't have to complain by yourself. If, you know, we work in a collaborative industry, we are collaborators. We should be able to work together. And, you know, if we do that, then, you know, we can achieve a critical mass. But, you know, it distresses me that people feel that they are on their own, when I really hope that we're working towards a place where they don't feel they have to carry that burden of wanting adequate working conditions by themselves.
Great, and I should just add in the chat, in the questions and answers, which I don't think the audience can see, there is a lot of comments coming in. Particularly Paul Evans from Directors UK is offering assistance to anyone in this conversation about how to get paid on time and how to work with Back2. So that's Paul Evans from Directors UK. There are also a couple of questions. One addressed to Katrin about the training. The question is, the training that sets good culture and working practices in advance. Is this something you extend to post-production workers as well?
Yes, absolutely. Everybody was expected to do the course, and yes, it should work from the beginning to the end. And
Great. And can you just tell us a bit about the course? Can you tell us a bit about the course and how it's
forgotten as far as working hours are concerned, because they're sitting inside or something, but post-production should also be taken into consideration as far as the working week is concerned, definitely.
Sorry, I interrupted you, but can you just tell us a bit about how people can access the Mark Milsom course and what it covers exactly?
Yes, through the Mark Milsom website, you can access the course, and it covers rules and regulations, but in a way of showing you making you aware of what you need to know, and how many hours you should have as a break, and how many hours you should work, but it's to make people aware, as opposed to, it's not like a test to teach you do pass the test at the end, but it's not like right or wrong. It's awareness, so that we know what we should be looking out for. We know what is acceptable to us. We know how everybody should treat us, and how we should treat other people as well.
Great. Now I'm just there's one last question, and then we're going to move on to solutions. This is aimed at Krista. Krista, you talked a bit about the new roles that add burden to the production manager's shoulders. What kind of recommendations can you make to ameliorate this? How should production managers deal with these extra tasks coming up?
I don't think it's up to the production managers to deal with them. I think the way one deals with that has to be right at the beginning. It's in budgeting. I mean, one of the things that we recommend in our report is that really, you know, a head of production, somebody senior from a production perspective, as opposed to an editorial perspective, being involved right from the get-go when negotiating commissions and actually looking at budgets, because the way it comes about is quite simply somebody very, very, very early in the process, much further upstream, somebody has said, oh, we don't need a production assistant, do we? And drawn a line through it so that they can, put the money on screen, because obviously the work the production managers do has nothing to do with anything that goes on screen. So they remove a line. That's it. And it has to be said, sometimes production managers themselves, but people are always looking to cut the budget. They cut a person out. Suddenly somebody's doing the job of 3 people, because they've taken people out of the budget. And the other thing that happens is somebody sails in and goes, here's an extra thing, what Katrin said before. Oh, production can do it. So it's not really for the production managers to figure out what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to dodge the extra additional jobs. They can't. They've got to be done. Production managers tend to be the kind of people who think this needs to be done. Production's got to go smoothly. I'll just have to take it on and do it. It's actually up to, the executive producers or whoever's putting together that budget right at the beginning. I know, for example, that Netflix, because they work a bit differently when they're doing commissions, will go through a budget and say, what's going on here? This budget line isn't sufficient. You need more production people than this. Sort yourselves out. But no, it's at that level. It's at that level. It's the combination. You mentioned it before, Rowan. The issue as well of the schedules. And you won't have this in drama so much, but the whole kind of you've got 3.5 days to crew up and get shooting from the date of the green light. That kind of nonsense that goes on. The combination of not enough money, not enough staff, and not enough time. Somebody ends up trying to do twice as much as is humanly possible.
Okay, so let's I want to start talking about how we can solve things, but I want to talk about equality, diversity, inclusivity. I read an article recently in The Guardian. It said 60% of workers in the media are upper middle class. 90% are white, 70% in managerial positions are white men, 1% of managers are black. When I joined the BBC in 2003, I remember in my interview process, they said, how would you change the ethnic makeup of the BBC and diversity issues? That was over 20 years ago. It's disheartening to see that very little has changed. But Rowan, this is what you talk about all the time and what you go and beat the drum about. So tell us about good working practices and how you get businesses to embrace EDI, as you call it, equality, diversity, inclusivity.
Well, I think it's about integrating EDI into the broader workspace. So at the moment, there is really, I've referenced earlier the disconnect between broadcasters, production companies, etc. But that is replicated in the EDI work, which is often kind of ghettoized, and we've seen repeated instances of EDI leads leaving institutions because the pressure of doing that work is so great when you don't have adequate structures in place. So they don't have pathways into actual production to make the change because, the different institutions, and I'm trying very hard not to single out a particular institution because I think they're all failing. They are siloed in such a way that this work cannot be integrated. Marcus Ryder, who's obviously doing fantastic work at the Film and TV Charity and previously at the Lenny Henry Centre for Media Diversity, is now talking about thinking about post-diversity. So really focusing on representation rather than kind of data-led what does diversity look like in terms of numbers. So it's about representation of voices. It's representation of working class people. And it's, and there's a fantastic academic at Leeds called Anamek Saha, who is really, really calling for what used to be called sort of positive discrimination. So actually senior leaders do stop, we need to see people who aren't white, non-disabled men from, very often, Oxbridge. They need to just not be employed. So, and I don't know if that's a radical thing to say. It doesn't feel particularly radical to me, but, we need people from underrepresented groups at the very top of TV and film. And then the culture will start to change more effectively. Women in film and TV has been going since 1989. There's still the representation of women at senior levels is tiny. I can't remember off the top of my head the last Diamond reporting, but I think it had actually gone down slightly. The representation of disabled people is not progressing. All of the groups, it's failing. So we need the chaps to move over, I'm afraid, is what I would say.
And are you talking to broadcasters about this? Are they receptive?
I do say this. I don't know how receptive they are. Some are more receptive than others. And I hope to praise them publicly one day. I can't really do that without calling out the others, though, at the moment. But, I think CISA will be a fantastic mechanism to make kind of these figures who still don't quite understand that they need to be reshaping the culture from the top, perhaps rethink their behavior. So that's a possibly controversial line, but I hope one that makes people support CISA.
And Esther,
Yeah.
you've told me before about really practical solutions that productions can deploy in order to encourage production managers to stay in the job. Recognizing that most production managers are women, they've got childcare issues. Just tell us a bit about what are actually cost-effective, cheap things that people can do quickly.
Keep production managers in the job. Well, I mean, one of them, Barone will tell you more than me, is job sharing. Not part-time jobs. Women with children a lot of the time, in fact, so much of the time, the narrative is, I left because I couldn't find work that wasn't, 18 hours a week. And I couldn't get childcare for 18 hours a week, assuming I wanted to do that. But part-time jobs are very problematic, mainly because they involve part-time pay, but not actually part-time working. So that's not ideal. But job share is very effective. And one of the interesting things, and as I say, this is more Rowan's area of mine, but the really interesting thing about job share is that there are a lot of people in this industry who will say, well, job share is completely impossible. You can't do this job. And for every person who will say such and such a job can't be done as a job share, you will find another person saying, yes, it can. I've been doing it. So people do tend to lack imagination about ways of doing things. And job share is the most single effective way of making production work accessible to women who have families. Simple as that. It's the single most effective way of doing it. And it is a big factor. I mean, children are a big factor in terms of production managers simply because so many of them are women. Losing women in that particular role means losing, most of your workforce. So yeah, can I pick up on the issue about diversity, Colin?
Yeah, of course.
Because I think there's a really important that there are a lot of schemes. Marcus has got some great stories. There are a lot of schemes that are supposed to encourage, say if there are people from, I'm sure ethnic minorities who are kind of on their third scheme and saying, I don't really need a job that's a scheme. And the industry does have a habit of saying, well, we just need to recruit more people from X, Y, and Z group. But these are entry-level jobs. And the representation issues are not at the entry-level jobs. There are quite a lot of people going in at entry level. It's the staying and making it through those first 5 years and surviving. And a lot of that comes down to, financial resources, which is why the issue with class has got worse almost all indicators have got worse than they were 10 years ago, because the harder things are financially, it is, I think at the recent select committee, Marcus was saying, actually, don't think I survived today, then the amount to which people are depending in order to work in television, people basically got to have parents who can keep them for 5 years, seems to be, so then all of these issues around who gets to actually make it just comes down to those kind of privileges very quickly, which is an appalling thing to be saying in 2024, I think.
And Katrin, you were nodding all the way through
Yeah,
that.
no, I was, because this is the point. There are all these schemes that are bringing people in at entry level, and it you're quite right, Rowan. It's at the top that needs to change, not at entry level. Wasn't middle class, and I was just lucky to be able to go from job to job, and I'm also a woman, and I've also brought up children, and I'm so yeah, but I can see how hard it is out there for people, and we need to be it's understanding that freelance world, and the fact that between jobs you are it's dry, there's nothing, and so you do need to be able to be kept somehow, whether you go and be a barista or whatever you go and do in the downtime, but then you're not available then when the job comes along, and so it's this freelance world that is really difficult for certain members and for certain people in society.
But there are mechanisms through which people can be given longer contracts, particularly entry level, where the salaries are lower. It doesn't make a huge dent in budgets to simply give people a year or 18 months on their contract.
Yeah, no, that's depending on who you're. For the moment, I'm working on an independent feature. Well, that is literally the length of the contract, and that is the end. Would it be for a production company or for a broadcaster? Yes, then things are different.
Yeah,
but there are places where it is really difficult with an
independent film is really, really hard. I think that's really the hardest place, and there needs to be a really close scrutiny of budgets and how they need to be increased, basically. But that's a problem for the BFI as much as anyone here. But yeah, just simply longer schedules would provide more stability across the board, and that requires more money going into budgets, and that requires a mindset shift from management into paying for the expertise that they receive from new entrants all the way up. How they need to actually pay people properly and look after them.
And this has probably happened. We were all employed by the BBC or ITV or studios traditionally, and that shift has meant that now we're not. And so we're not trained, we're not made aware of our rights, we're not made aware of when we should speak up, we're not financed throughout the year. So yes, it's all a bit difficult, but that's I think is where it's changed, in that we've all suddenly become freelance.
And Katrin, just would a job share on the production you're working on, would you employ people doing a job share?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I've never job shared myself. I don't know if it would ever have worked for me, but absolutely, I'd employ people on job scenario. Yes, because I can see how many things I've missed in life because I've been working the hours I've been working.
Okay, and so I've got a big topic, which we've only got 8 minutes or less than 8 minutes. I want to wrap it up in 3 minutes, but what do you think about the future of television production? I mean, are we going to go back to normality, or is it going to be this kind of dearth for a very long time? Let's start with Catherine, and then we can move around.
Well, what is normality? I mean, everything changes, doesn't it? And we have to evolve, and we have to, especially in an industry like the one we're in, we have to evolve with times. I think that there are things that need changing, and many of which we've spoken about today. But also, it's not all doom and gloom. I've had a great career and met some lovely people and done some great work. So, you know, everybody listening, it's not all bad. Yeah, there are definitely things we need to address, and many of those we've spoken about today.
Perhaps let me rephrase this. What would you advise someone trying to get into TV now, or, you know, sort of more junior level than you? What would you say to them how they can get ahead?
Well, I'd explain to them about the downtime, which is something that I think people don't explain about. So the fact that yes, it would be great to be employed for longer periods of time. It would be that would all be great. But the reality at the minute is that isn't what happens. So I'd explain to them about the way we work, because unless you've worked as a freelancer, it's really difficult to understand the ups and downs of the industry and the way we're employed. And nobody teaches anybody about that. You know, that you just find yourself in the middle of it, and then you're trying to negotiate your way through.
Okay. Krista, what would you tell someone trying to break in?
Actually, not dissimilar from Catherine, and we do that. I mean, obviously, at a university, it has one of the biggest, or three of the biggest production courses in the country, and we do things like explain what IR35 is and what a buyout contract is, and all sorts of things like that. Although the students aren't always paying a lot of attention, it's not their favourite subject. But no, I think there is a lot that people have to understand. And there's a lot of forewarned is forearmed in terms of people going into the industry. I sort of think telling young people how to manage in this mess isn't really, you know, the main thing. I think it's people who are in a rather more powerful position thinking about how they might reorganize it, because Catherine made the point before about the change post 1990 in Peacock and the casualization of the industry. And I think one of the problems with the casualization, and one of the many problems, you know, is that companies don't see the impact of what they're doing. When Alex Pumphrey was leading the film and television charity, you know, she used to sort of talk about those Deloitte figures that say that companies, I can't remember what the statistic is, every pound you invest in the mental health of your workforce comes back to you is worth £5, and that sort of thing. Of course, that doesn't apply if your workforce is going to be with you for 6 weeks, then take off and work for someone else. I think individual employers don't see the brain drain. They don't see people leave. Nobody leaves the production. They leave after the production. They don't see the burnout affect their workforce to have to cover it, because the burnouts happened after the production. It's just that poor person sitting there for 3 months not working because they can't cope, you know. So I think we have a system now whereby employers don't have to look at the burnout and the brain drain. They don't see it. They just get very cross when they do their next show and can't employ the person they want or can't recruit. So I think we've invisibilized those kind of issues. And somehow that we, you know, yeah, it's quite difficult because it's not in the interest of an individual employer to look after the people working for them. They've become a highly disposable thing. And that's the thing that we've kind of got to figure out. And I don't think it's up to 20-year-olds coming into the industry to sort that one out. I think it's up to commissioners and company owners and the super indies to actually have a real think about that, particularly Rowan's point about the longer contracts for new entrants and that sort of thing. That's my take.
Rowan, what would you say to a young person coming in? Your disposable resources, Krista says.
I would say join back to. Join back to. Always join back to. I would say I'm heartened by, so, you know, I'm not teaching at university at the moment, but I have done for a long time, and I always enjoyed the fact that my students seemed really unwilling to take on the burdens that they'd seen, that I was describing in film and TV, and many of them had seen their parents labouring under. And I think there is a move now to they're more aware of their own mental health, they're more aware of each other, and I think that's a fantastic thing, and I hope that continues. I would equally say it's not up to entry-level freelancers to be solving the problems of TV and film. I would argue for a dissolution of the disconnect between broadcasters and production companies. They have an equal responsibility to run their productions adequately and with care. There's an awful lot of paper and a lot of words on that paper describing the ways in which they can avoid responsibility for their employees. And I think that has to be really, really looked at and understood as something that production companies and broadcasters need to take on between them, and really accept it as their job to look after their freelancers.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there because I want to be respectful of people's time. Before I say thank you to the panel, I'm just going to summarize quickly some of the key lessons. So from McCartran, understand downtime. Don't forget to do the Mark Milsom course, which if you're a RiskPal member, you can get a discount on. From Krista, think about job shares and innovative ways of employing staff and understanding your rights. And Rowan has said, join Back2 and keep up the fight against the broadcasters so they start taking responsibility for their actions and not just the unintended consequences of casualization of the staff contract. I think it's been really interesting. I think it's a start. One thing I would just say before I say thank you to the panel is we will be in touch to all the members, all the participants who have joined us, and we will share the video link and keep the conversation going. And one thing that you can absolutely do today is there will be a link to the GoFundMe page. You can help John Balsam's widow, who's pregnant and has a daughter already. So I'm going to say thank you to the panel on that note. Rowan, Catherine, Krista, thank you so much for giving up your time.